Okay, well, since we are live and it's 1 o'clock, I will like to greet you in the name of all organizers of PUBMET2020 conference on our workshop number 3. Our workshop leader today is our dear Anne-Mette Somby from Western Norway University of Applied Sciences, where she is the leader of the section for research ethics and privacy in research. And she will talk about why data should be fair and how it should be fair. So before Anne-Mette Somby starts to share her presentation with us, I would like to just ask you to ask questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and not in the chat section. You can chat there with all other participants, and then I will try to address with Anne-Mette some of the questions after her presentation. So please, Anne-Mette, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone from Norway. You can see the Aurora Borealis behind me, I guess. So I'm originally from the northern part of Norway also. I will now give you my presentation in fair data management, and I hope you have a lot of questions so we can discuss after. I was a privacy advisor at the Norwegian Center for Research Data for many years, and the research data center also work with archiving and data management. So I got into how to make data fair, especially the personal data, how to make them fair. I also work with training in data protection, data management, and fair data. Now I'm responsible for research ethics, privacy, and data management at the research department at the Western Norway University of Applied Sciences. So now about the fair data management. I will talk about the FAIR principles, and I will also talk about how to manage personal data and make data fair. I will also address the challenges we need to meet and that we need to address to make the data fair. And as I told you in the first take, I am building some of this on the work that OpenAIR has already done before me, especially on the FAIR principles. The reason why we talk about fair data is, first of all, that the funders require fair data. I believe that we have had this requirement since 2015, maybe earlier, but I was mostly working with this from an archive perspective, not from a research perspective. So I have been into this topic as an advisor, not as a researcher, or I have not been applying for funding, so I don't have that perspective. But of course, if you have, you can always give me your perspective on this. Funders also require data to be shared and archived so that we can reuse the data. We also know that journals require that you deposit the data that you will use in that are in your publication, and they will require documentation of your data. And I think the reason why we have this kind of requirement is that research data are valuable in different ways for different units or societies or funders or journals. And for us, for the research community, we know that it takes time and effort to collect data. And from our perspective, fair data gives us the possibility to reuse data in other research projects. And we can save money and time on reuse of existent data. So I think that this principle is in many ways a very good principle, but also there are challenges. And I also need to address that fair data gives us the opportunity to verify results fair data adds openness and transparency to the research. And I think those are very important values in research. So the one key element for fair data is the data management plan. To make the data fair, you need to plan the life cycle of your data. And there are some headlines for what the data management plan need to include. First of all, you need to describe your handling of the research data during and after the end of the project. You need to include what data will be collected, processed, and/or generated. You also need to include which methodology and standard that you will apply. You will also need to address whether data will be shared, made open access, and how the data will be curated and preserved. And it also includes after the end of the project. You will find that we have different templates online. I recommend to use an online template because it can be updated throughout the project. It's difficult for me to advise one certain online template because I live, of course, in Norway and we have, you know, our standards. But I know that there are more universal standards of data management template online. This is a visualization of the data lifecycle. As you can see, we always start with building the data management strategy at the beginning. And the data management plan is essential for this. And the second part is the design and the data collection. And in many cases, if you are collecting personal data, you need to address informed consent, the legal basis for collecting the data, etc. And after you have collected the data, you need to prepare the data, you need to transcribe them, anonymize them, and you need to check the quality. And the process further is the analysis and the publication. And at the point 5, you need to preserve the data. What is your policy at your university? Which formats do you want to use? And for this stage, you might need some special skills that you need to get outside university or maybe from the library or from a repository or an archive. So the last stage here is the data sharing, where you need to deposit your data and you need to promote your data, make the data visible. And all of this is the data life cycle. So what about the fair data? How to make it fair? What does it fair means? A lot of organizations have discussed and organized events, and they have produced information on fair data. So I have used the resources from the OpenAir website, and I also used some resources from the CESTA training website. But as you can see, there are a lot of organizations that are talking about this and are discussing this. So first of all, you need to make data findable. That's the F in the FAIR. And then to make data findable, you need to ensure that your data has a persistent identifier. And one example of a persistent identifier is a digital object identifier, a DOI. And when you deposit your data in a repository, they will most of the time assign your data a DOI. So, and another important step is that you ensure that you have rich metadata. And you also need to make sure that data is searchable and discoverable online. So the metadata is important because it makes the data findable and makes the data cited and reused. And examples on metadata schemes is Dublin Core. And I need to say that I'm not an expert in this, so I rely on my expert at university at the library when I need to discuss this in detail. So I don't think that anyone asks you to know all of this in detail. So know that there are skilled people that know this better than us. All right. So what about the A? How to make data accessible. This means that your data is always available and obtainable, even if the data is restricted, the metadata is open. So we talk about making the data as open as possible, as close as necessary. And here is where the obstacles often arrive. If you have personal data or data that are sensitive in one or another way, you need to make the access restricted. But you can always make your metadata available. So you need to make your data, your metadata, or your data accessible by ensuring that it is retrievable online using the standardized protocols. And you need to have restrictions in place if it's necessary. Your personal data can be stored separately from your metadata. So you can store your personal data in the project in a secure place with restricted access. And at the same time, you can make your metadata on your whole data set available online. This will ensure that you have made the data accessible, even though if some of your data is not accessible. And you can always say that the data, my personal data, will always be restricted. I cannot share it with everyone. Or you can also make sure that some of your personal data or identifiable data can be shared with others. I will talk about that later. Okay, so how to make your data interoperable? Okay, so this is something that the experts will know a lot of. So you need to make your data interoperable using common formats and standards and control vocabularies. So interoperable data means that it can be integrated with other data applications and workflows. So in many cases, as I said, you will need specialized skills to ensure that data are interoperable. And sometimes the library can help you. In other cases, a repository might do this. So what we want to make sure is that your data can be used and reused in different countries, in different cultures over time by using common format and standards. So how to make data reusable? You need to make the data sufficiently described and shared with the least restrictive licenses and allowing the widest reuse possible and the least cumbersome integration with other data sources. So this sums up what the other letters have already addressed. So you need to document your data. You need a good description of your data. You need to give information on tabular data, on the data processing steps you went through, and you also should give contact information. So if anyone wants to know more about your data and the process, they can contact you. It's always advisable to have a clear license. And the guidelines under Horizon 2020 recommended the CC0 or CC BY. This is also something you can check online if you want to know what this licensing is. When I'm producing material, I always use the license CC BY if I'm going to publish it online. This means that everyone can use it free, but they cannot. They need to cite me, and they cannot do or change the product I have published. So, what are the challenges to making the data fair? What I see is that we have conflicting interests between the protection of personal data and the demand for openness. I also see that there are different thoughts about the ownership ideas to data, and there are cultural differences, and there are also differences between research fields. I also see that there is a lack of data management training and support in institutions. And of course, this varies across countries and across institutions inside countries. So I will address some of these issues here now and give some suggestions to how we might solve some of the issues. So I will start with the open data principle, the requirements that are in contradiction with each other. What we see is that we have an increasingly complex research landscape. We have legal regulations that are imposed on us that we need to follow. We need to give special care to sensitive and personal data. So we need to bridge a gap between the law requirements and the research practice and the demands for open data. So I will just address the GDPR regulation. As you know, it came in 2018, and Norway as EEA member implemented this. And if you are a part of or collaborating with the EU, you will probably need to follow this regulation. So it applies to any data controller or processes in the EU who collects personal data about people in EU anywhere, or if you are collecting data about people in the EU, the regulation will apply. If you are situated in a EU country and collects data about people in other countries, and the regulation will apply. Okay. So the point is that you will need to address this regulation when you are conducting research in this area in some or another way. So, but I want to address what is personal data. Personal data is any information relating to an identified or identifiable person. A person may be identified by name, images, or videos, or email, IP addresses, or a number of, or a list of names, through photo and video recordings, or a combination of different kinds of background information. And the GDPR will apply to the processing of this kind of information. And processing means collecting, registering, storing, and in all ways you can send or achieve personal data in a project. Hopefully you understand this. It's not so, but I will also address, this is personal data. We also have a concept called special categories of personal data. These categories of personal data demands higher protection and documentation of societal benefits. So you need to really give a good explanation of why you need to collect this kind of data. And sometimes you need to make this data protection impact assessment. I will not go into the details of this data protection impact assessment. But it's important to be aware. And the data protection impact assessment is the documentation of the societal benefit and also how you will protect your data. So it's important to have this in mind. So if we were to share personal data or special categories of data, you need a legal basis for it. So sharing means sharing in a collaboration or also sharing to make data fair. So if it's impossible for you to anonymize your data totally, or if you want to share personal data to other researchers after you have finished your own project, it's possible if you have a legal basis for it. One example of sharing personal data is sharing recordings of people's voices. And sometimes it's necessary to do that if you are doing language research, for instance. That is one example that we know about is archives where you give access to recordings of people talking. So doing this, you need a legal basis. So the legal basis is for collecting data, but also for sharing and making data reusable. So these are the legal bases we have for processing and sharing and archiving data that you have acquired through research. So the most common for those are the consent, of course. You know about the consent. You ask, do you want to participate in this project? And you get a consent from the participants. You can also carry out a task in the public interest. That is another legal basis, and this legal basis will not ask for consent. When you are processing or sharing special categories of data, you need to have either explicit consent from the participants, or you can state that personal data are made public by the data subject, him or herself, or it's necessary for the archiving, scientific or statistical purposes. So I will argue that the last one here, that is necessary for archiving, scientific or statistical purposes, is a legal basis we can argue when we are making data fair and when the data is not anonymized totally. But I will talk about consent. So the consent needs to be freely given. It must be a genuine choice. People need to be able to withdraw without any consequences, and they need to be not to be in a dependent relationship with the researcher. The informed consents need to be specific. You need to give clear information on the extent and the consequences. And here you need, if you are going to make your data fair, and if you're going to maybe make the data available after your project is finished, you need to give clear information on which data you will make available for others for reuse after the project, for how long and where, and how it will be handled in the repository or the archive where you are going to deposit it after. So the information you give is crucial for the reuse of the data after the project is ended. So for the data to be fair, you need to give explicit and clear information. So also there is requirements that the language should be clear and simple, especially when you are including children in your research. You are not allowed to use these opt-in or pre-ticked boxes. You need to ask for some kind of activity so that you are sure that your participants really want to be a part of your project. It should also be easy to withdraw from the project, so you need to provide information on where to get in touch with you. And especially if you're going to make the data available or make it fair, you also need to address how to make the data unfair, so to speak. Is it possible for participants to withdraw their data after you have made it available through a repository or an archive? You need to think about this. And you shall be able to demonstrate that the consent is given. So this means you need to document the consent. It means that it can be on a written consent, a document, or an audio recorded oral consent. And also if you are conducting a survey, you will also have this box you can the participant can tick. I will participate in this research. This is how we do it in Norway, at least. So, protecting privacy in research. I made 4 steps here on the protecting part. First of all, you need to obtain informed consent, also for the data sharing and preservation or curation of the data. This is the point you need to think about. How do I need consent for making the data fair? Is there some steps I need to inform on making to make sure that my data will be fair? And the second step is that you need to protect identities. This is important in all research. Protect identities and anonymize the data during your processing of the data, and do not collect personal data if it's not necessary. The third step is to regulate the access to the data where needed. You can regulate it, you can by group or by use or by time period. And this is also for the project, during your project period, and also after you have made your data available in a repository or an archive. And also remember to securely store and protect personal and sensitive data during your processing. So I already touched upon this. What if anonymization is not possible? I think I was going to address here. Yeah, it's impossible. Sorry. So this is to sum up that you need to obtain consent for sharing your non-anonymous data, and you need to regulate or restrict the access to non-anonymized data. And this is during the whole process, the whole data lifecycle. You need to think about the consent and how to restrict access for non-anonymized data. So, sorry for the confusion about in the language here. So, hopefully you understand. Okay, so I will also address the ownership and the cultural differences. This is something I have only addressed in the last years. So what we work on in my institution is making this open data policy, where we address this demand for fair data from funders and journals. So I think it's important that you address this at the institutions, and you need to ask, what do my institution want me to do in my research, making my data fair? you can make your own or use existing guidelines for data management. The existing ones are, for instance, Open Air and SESTA guidelines. You can find a lot of resources in those organizations. What I see is that contracts between collaborators and funders and institutions need to address the ownership to the data. It's not something that I think we need to discuss this more. Who owns the data in collaborations? I think this is a major issue that we can argue about for a long time if it's not stated in the contract before we start. And also budgets need to address the cost of making data fair, because it needs skills, it need time, and you need you need training, and all of this cost. So the budgets in the project need to address it, and also the budget at the institution need to address the cost of making data fair. And of course, the data management training and support is not good enough. It's not, it's people, researchers tell me this every day, that we don't have any training in data management, and still we are expected to make the data fair. We didn't have any training, we don't get any training. Where do we find training for this? So what we see is that data management plans are required when you apply for funding from EU, for instance. So the institution needs to provide training for researchers and students in data management and FAIR principles, and I think I will advise to do this in the early stages, to provide training in data management and FAIR principles. The research administration and the library are important resources in this training, and in, of course, curation of the data. And of course, again, the budget needs to include this. So otherwise, we cannot make the data fair. We need to have the time and the skills to do it. And I don't think that anyone expects the researchers to do all this themselves. They need the support from other skilled advisors at their uni. So, conclusion. Well, I don't think it's easy to conclude on this. This is only my perspective. Of course, I am an advisor in this field, and I try to train people in this, and I find it. I like it, but of course, it's not easy. It's difficult to do this. How to meet the demands for FAIR and the open data. So the open research framework is an invitation to make data as open as possible, depending on their nature. So if you have personal data, it's difficult to make the data fair, but it's possible. And of course, ethics is a matter of practice. You need to experience how to make the data fair. So it requires a number of trade-offs and compromises in the process. You cannot get all in the same time. You cannot get open data and protected data at the same time. So when it comes to the conflict between open data and the protection of data, you need to do some trade-offs and compromises. But of course, the data management planning allows you to identify and plan for action needed to make data shareable throughout the research life cycle. So I think the most important thing is to use a data management plan online, and just try to reflect on how to make data shareable using that template a data management plan. So you need to consider whether you will collect informed consent for sharing personal data. You also need to consider how you might anonymize your data and how you can access give access at the same time. And of course, you can contact repositories, archives at an early stage. They will provide you with, hopefully provide you with some more information. So in this slide, I have made some references and resources. Hopefully, I'm not sure if you will make this available online so you can click on them. But of course, as I mentioned, is the SESTA website, the Open Air website. Those are important resources for you in this work. And for the last, I want to show you Norway and Western Norway's characteristic features, the fjords. I should, of course, invite you, but maybe we need to wait until the COVID situation is changing. So, and also here is my email address. And since we cannot meet, you can contact me on the email, of course. I will always be happy if you contact me to ask questions. But we can have, I will stop sharing now and we can have questions.
Well, thank you, Anne-Mette, for a nice presentation, for the invitation to come to Norway. I hope that we will be able to do that in next years. And apologize once again for the very apologize for the distraction at the beginning, but the people are saying that it's excellent and very useful presentation, so the waiting was worthwhile. So we have just enough time for several quick questions. One of the questions is, what do you mean by anonymization in the data preparation step?
I think anonymization, you can, what I was talking about was that you can anonymize your data in the processing of your data during your, if you are somehow processing it, you can remove the direct identifier in the processing period, so you can make the data less identifiable. But I think anonymization is I think you need to look at it as, you know, more or less identifying until it's totally anonymized. So the recommendation is to make your data as least identifiable as possible in all your processing.
So we have another question from India. Priyanka is asking, are the data management principles different for different countries, or is it universal? So what are your experiences with that?
I have only experienced, you know, the Western Europe and maybe the United States and of course the UK, and the experiences from it is that the principles are universal. I don't think it's a very I don't think it's a lot of differences here. I think there should be universal also. I think these are good principles to use.
Regardless of
Yeah,
countries or parts
yeah,
of the world.
I think so.
I just have one question regarding storage of informed consent and storage of all data, which is already available online. And if you cannot have informed consent, how do you deal with such data? So you have like records from previous years, the owners of the records either change or pass away or something. So how can one address that without an informed consent?
First of all, you need to state the legal basis for the processing or the storing of the data. So you need to have someone with the legal competence to do that, to state which kind of legal basis you have. And at the same time, you should make information about the project or the data available online, so that if anyone wants to have information on how it was collected and how it's stored, which legal basis you have used, they will find it easily. So it's I think openness and transparencies are very important values here.
Yeah, as much as possible.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I am thinking about one, it's more like mental picture, where should we store all the data? Because we will have in future so many information, not sure whether we have capacity to store them all. So I don't know if the technological advances will follow that.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you asked on that, because you have these digital repositories, online repositories, and my university uses a repository called Dataverse. You can of course all just visit our website and you will hopefully find more information about that, but I can always provide you with information. So this kind of digital or cloud-based archive will of course be able to store amounts of data, big amounts of data. So I don't think that's a problem. Of course, the problem could be the cost, the budgets. So you need to have some funding for having this kind of agreement with this kind of repository. But they also have, of course, their own. Of course, it's a win-win situation for the repository also. So I don't think it's something that is very have a very high cost, of course. So,
but it's very interesting to know that. Well, just one last question, because we don't have enough time. We have to move to the next session. From Lik Barota, who is saying that the presentation is great, and he's asking, do we have quantitative data about the global verification of research yet? So do we know how fair is our research today globally? Do you have some data about it?
yeah, okay, I'm glad you asked, because one of our researchers is conducting research on this matter. She is called Valeria Swanich at my university, and she has she does research on this topic, but I don't think we have that. I think the answer is no. We don't have any information on this.
Perhaps in future we will have more data about it. Well, that will be all for now. I hope to meet you soon in some other webinar, which our Croatian Association for Scholarly Communication will gladly organize. So I just want to say to all participants that the presentation will be available online after the conference. You can then check all the references that Anne-Mette has mentioned, and also contact her if you have any other questions. So thank you very much, Anne-Mette. It was so nice to see you again, and hope to meet you in Norway next year.
Yes.
And thank you all for being patient with us and for listening and for asking such great questions. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.